Hi, Jason.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I was just laughing to myself here.
What?
I think it's a sign of the future. I was basically sitting for a few minutes here on a call with nothing but
All these
AI
all these note
note
takers.
takers.
Well, if I can offer a piece of so I tried clicking on the link that has been working from the original calendar invite, and I
Okay.
had to go to your LinkedIn and then re-sign up to reserve a spot and then get a new link. If it's just you and me today, it might be people are having some technical difficulties.
Wait a minute. So just so I understand, you do you have the calendar invite that's a recurring calendar invite on your calendar, like Google
Yeah,
Calendar?
so like I was using the link from the first one I ever signed up for. And then
Okay.
I just like was like, okay, well, let's just tell it to repeat every Thursday so I don't forget about it.
Yeah.
And it's been working until today.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, I'll have Ella, my human assistant, take a look at that and see what might be going on.
Because I
Anyway,
clicked it and it said something like invalid link. And I was like, okay, well, let's go see what Eric's LinkedIn page says.
no, okay. Well, you made it. It's
Yeah,
a bit of a organic filter, I guess. I don't know. I mean, people that are here want to be here.
it's a test. It's like, how badly do you want to find out about this?
It's not by design. Let me reassure you.
No, it's not.
It's funny, we get that sometimes, right? Like I've recruited for a lot of early stage companies, and as you might imagine, despite our best efforts, a lot of the experience is still chaotic.
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot of times, I'm very curious about the candidate experience. I'll ask them, how was the experience? Where could we improve? And they'll share with me certain things, and they were like, I didn't know if this was by design to test my tolerance for ambiguity or what. I was like, no, not by design.
Yeah, I don't know. I
But
had a manager who once asked us to get on a call and just sat there. And he was like, it was a test to see who would just take charge. And we were like,
ah,
why would you do that? Like in the middle of a project, like on week 3 or something, I was like, that's not really fair. He's like, I just wanted to see what would happen if I like threw a hand grenade into the process and who would step up. And I was like, I don't think we're that kind of company. I mean, it didn't work for me and it didn't work for several other people, but I don't know if it worked for someone in particular.
yeah,
But
yeah. Social experiments, I suppose.
he never tried it again after that.
He might have seen that on a meme or something or a YouTube video.
I mean, yeah, maybe there's just the desire to do something different or to shake
Yeah.
up what maybe felt like static weekly meetings.
Pattern interrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's probably just you and me today. So
Cool.
what can we talk about? I saw this disturbing. There's a lot of disturbing YouTube videos out there.
No doubt.
But there's one I ran across the other day that was hi Divya, how are you? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, good, good. Jason and I were just kind of catching up here while we were waiting for folks to come in, and I was talking a little bit about YouTube videos that are quite disturbing. One that I saw recently was with Andrew Yang, I think the presidential candidate at some point. I forgot how long ago, but anyway, he was talking. He was just talking about AI and just how jobs are going to go away, and that's kind of the common news out there, but. I don't watch the news, but I just came across this video, which kind of, I haven't watched these kinds of videos in a while, but I just, okay, I'll click on it and let me watch it. And it's like, oh man, things are moving faster than maybe I had anticipated. I
Mhm.
thought these things would be more serious over the course of the next 5 years or so. But he's talking, and this is a recent video, I think maybe within the last 2 or 3 weeks. And he was just talking about, it's not next 5 years, it's like now, it's like the next 12 months.
Yeah.
And I was like, what does this mean for like people, like knowledge workers that are looking for their next opportunity? Does it just mean like it's just completely hopeless, or you have thousands of people going against, trying to get hired for that one position? Like what's going on? And I don't know. I didn't know what to make of it. But I'm just curious, are you guys running across some of these kinds of content, and how are you reacting? How are people that you are working with in terms of like the NSA, like how are they reacting to kind of some of this signal?
Hmm. Well, I'm not working, so I don't really interact too many with people that are using it. A lot of the different networking groups I'm in, I only see two camps. I see people that are like, it's fun, you should learn it, it's really important. And then everyone else that goes, I can't do it. I can't get my head around it.
Yeah.
I don't want to engage with it. And,
You're talking
I
about AI.
yeah,
Talking
yeah.
about, yeah,
And
okay. Okay.
I feel, I feel for them because I can remember what it's like to be overwhelmed by something, and especially when you're unemployed and you're trying to do all this other different stuff. But it's like you got to carve out some time for it, because
Yeah.
I think and it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to make the next agent or even like make the next big thing. You just have to be able to show people that you're not afraid of it, you're curious, you're willing to spend a little time in there and get your hands dirty. And also be able to articulate how you make it work for you. Right. Like I would never want to,
Mm.
I think I would not be a very valuable worker if I was like, yes, I let AI make all my decisions.
Yeah. Jason, Divya, I assume both of you are quote unquote knowledge workers.
I
Is
would
that
like to think
fair?
so. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it
I
seems like the
would
problem we're
consider myself a knowledge worker. Yeah.
You consider yourself a knowledge worker. Yeah, same here, right? I'm pushing bits and bytes, right? Like I'm not picking up a shovel, right? I'm not doing anything with my hands other than typing with a keyboard, which seems to be less and less nowadays as I type less now. It's funny, right?
True.
I'm just I talk to my computer now.
Yeah.
And it does what I want it to do largely. Hi, Andrea. And so like, given that most of us here and most of us in the NSA are knowledge workers, I think a lot of us are trying to solve for a short-term problem, but there's sort of a looming long-term problem. I mean, the short-term problem being let's find our next position, our next client, whatnot. But then the long-term problem or challenge is, okay, what does this mean for the future of my career or my job?
Yeah.
I know most folks are just focused on, okay, next 12 months I need to find my next position, but what about the next few years, next 5 years? And I don't know. I was just curious, Andrea, before you jumped on, I was just posing the question of, how are people reacting to sort of this longer term looming existential threat of AI and it consuming or just doing a better job than you could ever do, for the most part, in your occupation. And it's a big question, and I don't know. It was just sort of my topic. It was just something that was on my mind. I mean, I'm here for you guys. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. While Jason and I were waiting, we were just kind of pontificating a little bit. If you have any ideas or thoughts, I'm happy to hear them. But otherwise, I'm happy to jump into whatever I might be able to help with. I think you're on
Andrea, we can't hear you.
Classic. I was just going to offer one thought about the what they're calling the fourth industrial revolution. There's been a lot of thought in the forums like the World Economic Institute about it, and they have a lot of good materials. They've thought it through, like what industries are going to be most impacted and timeframes and stuff like that. But it's a structural, overhaul on the scale of the industrial, third industrial revolution was like the steam engine and weaving loom and all that back in the Victorian era. So here we are, the new Victorians.
I love it.
Yeah, it's yeah, and I don't know. I'm starting to think more and more about it, but it feels like the pace at which things are changing, like how do we keep up with that pace in terms of, skating to where the puck is going to be? Do we just become more flexible in terms of occupation? And that's hard, right? It's hard, and people are very resistant to it because you're letting go of decades potentially of experience that you have to say, okay, I'm going to start over and become a plumber or whatever the case may be, right? And that's hard for people to do. It's really hard for people to do that. But anyway, I don't know. I might be picking up a shovel soon. Anyway, how can I help you guys? I'm here for you as far as, again, I do this, once a week, and it's really just so folks can pick my brain and I can share what I know about recruiting and hopefully have some sort of positive effect on your job search.
I just want to say it's nice to meet you, Eric. I emailed you. I just heard about you again from another job search council referral. And watched some of your older videos and was like, oh, this guy's great. So I'm really excited about you're just putting yourself out here, hosting the forum. Yeah, the conversations are really high quality. So I sent you a question in advance. I don't know if I don't want to monopolize the conversation here, but
how did you send it to me? I'm sorry.
It's about being an older worker impacted by all this change and sort of the, oh no, it was about having a job gap. That's what it was. Being out of the market for a couple of years and trying to get back in and having a big job gap. How do you address that with your LinkedIn, with I don't know, your narrative?
Yeah. So here's how I'll try to answer that question. It feels like there's two forces at work here. Like one is like macro force, right? And we were just talking about this, like this rising or falling tide of AI and how it's just affecting everybody across the board. So I'll try to answer minus that. Right, because I have no idea like how AI is going to affect everything. I mean, so in terms of the micro piece, right? Maybe going back 5 years ago, where AI was not really a big deal. If you have a gap in your resume as a recruiter, right? What I'll offer you is just kind of my perspective as a recruiter. When I see a gap, it raises questions, right? And the first question is, what is this gap? Is it a gap of unemployment? Is it a gap of a career change or a career, flirting with a different career path and maybe coming back to the original career path? Like, what is the nature of this gap, right? I assume you're referring to like an employment gap. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe you took some personal time off or whatever, family, children, caring for an elderly parent, whatever the case may be. When I see a gap on a resume, my question is, okay, well, what's the nature of the gap? And what really the calculus I'm doing is like, how does that gap factor into a sort of an overall risk score of me presenting that candidate to the hiring manager, right? My role as a recruiter is to be eyes and ears and sort of somewhat kind of gatekeeper for the hiring manager, because the hiring manager can't spend all their time doing this, right? So I get calibrated on the hiring manager, usually the hiring manager, as well as other folks that are part of the decision-making process are looking for, right? And what they're not looking for. And then once I have a good sense of that, I go out to the talent market, either by, sourcing of folks that are largely, not active, and or looking at inbound people that are applying, like applicants, right? And then I look at their background through that lens of what my understanding is that the team is looking for. And when I see a gap, um, gaps are becoming more common now, right? So you can kind of, it's not a total like stigma like maybe it was 5 or 10 years ago, whatever the case may be, right? But the question still comes up, all things being equal, you have 5 candidates with no gap and then 1 candidate with a gap. Okay, so just all things being equal, the recruiter will probably bias towards the 4 candidates without a gap, right? Because it's less for the recruiter to think about. It's less risk for the recruiter, right? Now, how do you, if you have 4 candidates that are here and you're that 1 candidate with a gap, like how do you kind of level up? I think part of it is, as a recruiter, I'm looking for, what was that time? How was that time dedicated, right? And what's the narrative around that time? So, if the gap is small, maybe less than a year, 6 months, 3 months, if the gap is, I would say the risk is proportional with the time, right? If it's a 5-year gap, it's a big gap, right? Right. Back in 2012, that was my last formal product management position. For me to go and apply for a product manager position now, since 2012, that was my last formal product management position. Since then, I've been in recruiting. Like I would have to like bridge that gap somehow and somehow demonstrate that the past, whatever, 13, 14 years, like I've actually been doing product management. I wasn't wearing that title, wearing that hat, right? So I think with the gap that you have, the question is, how can you start putting some labels on it that creates some continuity, right? Again, maybe it's worth asking, like, was it the gap? Can you tell me more about the gap? Like, how long was it and what were you doing?
Yeah, a couple of years, partly personal time, partly upskilling. So I was trying to pivot more in lean into this AI trend, learn some machine learning AI skills. And then I found it really, it just didn't work. I have a PhD in transportation planning, which is a quantitative field. But it's not quite engineering. People don't read it as it's a social science. Really, it's about forecasting demand for future. And I was in unknown services like bike share, scooter share, ability service, autonomous vehicles, and so. Very cool stuff, but not really translating quite into I was trying to pivot more in the data science, machine learning kind of direction, and it just didn't work. Like my PhD plus a certificate in AI/ML it went nowhere in the job market. And so I kind of stepped back again and have tried to repivot. I don't know, I'm trying to recast my material. It's more of a user experience research because I was really doing surveys and partnering from industry to academia and doing like field trials and stuff like that, surveys, more to sort of measure demand and for the forecasting tasks. But yeah, so it's just been a journey. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Prior to that pivot, were you in academia, or were you?
I was an academic who transitioned to industry, and I was in automotive in Silicon Valley.
Okay. And what kind of function or role were you playing? Like product management, research scientist?
Yeah. So
Okay,
like scoping out big research projects with in partnership with universities.
I see. Okay. All right. And then you started to go into, I mean, was it would you consider that a hard pivot going into more machine learning AI?
I thought it was more of like a narrowing because the type of job I was doing is really shrinking. This kind of old fashioned R&D just isn't really, everybody, it got cut in half, basically. I was like, that's over. That era is over. So I should lean more into a classic IC role. And I thought, yeah, I could kind of specialize more in this new emerging area of AI, which it was just really kind of upgrading some of my outdated quantitative skill sets. Yeah. And it was great. But yeah, it just didn't, I never was able to translate that into, I think I was competing against people coming out of, like a physics PhD who used ML for their PhD, right? And I wasn't ever able to be competitive. So there's just the gap kept getting longer and longer, and like because your confidence starts tanking and you start taking breaks. It gets into a really bad, negative spiral of.
That's a whole other thing that needs to be managed, right? And I think the NSA is great for providing a sense of community to help on each other. But just going back, just a few observations. So you said a few years, you said that word pivot. And I think the words that we use are, I try to do this myself. I try to be really measured about the words that I use, because a pivot, when I hear the word pivot, it's like a complete change. And then you use the word narrowing, which sounds more, it sounds smoother, in terms of your narrative, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be careful in using that word pivot if you start, getting into interviews with folks, and just talking to folks. Because when I use the word pivot, when I hear the word pivot, it's like going from software engineer to graphic designer to it's like a real meaningful change, right? Whereas you also use the word narrowing, which it feels like it might be more narrowing than pivot. When I think pivot, I think 180. It's different. It's completely different.
That's helpful. Yeah. I think it is more of a narrowing, instead of doing the sort of, external facing partnerships and, just sort of just narrowing down to like IC and a data sciencey team.
Yeah. And why that's important, the smoothing, why that's important is because it creates in the mind of the recruiter or the interviewer, it reduces the risk, right? If your narrative is smoother, it reduces the perceived risk. If it's, how do you say, jagged or disjointed or fragmented, then the perception is like, oh wow, this person doesn't really know what they want to do. They might join the company and quit in 6 months. It's just kind of risky, right? But if you maybe at the time when you were narrowing, it just kind of happened organically. But when you're telling the story in hindsight, you can tell it with 2020 hindsight vision that this was intentional. Like, this is what I was hoping to do. You can smooth out the narrative, right? But if you're telling the narrative in a way that, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I just kind of fell into it, and I was pivoting 180 from here to there, it sends this signal, whether consciously or subconsciously, that it's risky. The candidate is more risky, right? So I'm just kind of giving you my perception. The fact that you were, upskilling in the area of machine learning and AI, I think that's quite valuable and quite marketable. You just got to figure out how to spin it and integrate that into your overarching narrative. The other observation I'll make, or comment I'll make, is depending on the kinds of companies and roles that you're pursuing, I know that as a recruiter that's been working with mostly earlier stage companies, there is a bit of a, how do you say, preconceived notion of a PhD that you need to be careful of. And the notion is this: the person is too academic. I don't even know if this is the right word, but like ivory tower, right?
Mhm.
And they're more inclined to pontificate and think about things than to actually get shit done, right? I'm not saying this is you. I'm just saying that I know this for a fact that hiring managers, and again, not all of them have this preconceived notion, but that notion exists. So you just have to be careful of it,
Yeah.
right? So, and how can you mitigate that? I mean, if you're applying to a company that you feel that would work against you, drop the PhD from your resume. And I know that's hard for people. You know, it's like, damn, this was a big part of my life. I spent a lot of time earning this PhD. I'm really proud of the work I did, but you have to be practical at the same time. You know, it's like you have to kind of morph the presentation, and morphing the presentation doesn't necessarily mean you're like you're giving up on yourself and who you are. You're still true to yourself, but at the same time, you have to understand like how things can get. You know, you can get prematurely disqualified, right? It happens, right? Because recruiters are making shortcuts. You know, they're
Even if you have a successful track record in industry with a lot of projects to show, like have a portfolio. So it's interesting. I'm familiar with this bias,
yeah.
but yeah, I figured that might be more if you like, there's a lot of people trying to pivot out of academia into industry without this experience. But if you've already done that and have a track record, maybe is it still a factor?
It's really case by case, right? I think that's part of where you have to analyze the company, the culture, you know. So if you're applying for a company where maybe the founders are PhDs, that is probably pervasive in the culture, right? So to add another PhD to the team, it's not a big deal, right? If you're looking at a team where their background, maybe none of them have college degrees, maybe they never came from academia, or maybe they never went to college.
Right.
You know, they might have a preconceived notion of PhDs being, just a highly academic and maybe whatever the case may be, right? Like, so you have to analyze the team that you're interviewing with and make some assumptions about the culture might be like, and look at your profile and say, at least on the surface, like, at least optically on the surface, would my profile fit into their culture, And you could do those analyses with GPT, right? And so, so yeah, like that's one thing that I would say. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I really appreciate the perspective of risk management that you're. Yeah, it's helpful.
You know, Andre, when you were telling us a little bit about yourself, I heard you say that you recognize that some of the old ways that your industry was operating were kind of falling out of fashion. And I think that segues perfectly into explaining why you chose to make the narrowing that you did, is that you were looking for new models, new ways of doing things. Maybe you jumped a little bit too early. It's up to you if you want to say that. I don't really know. But, just thinking about weaving all this into a narrative, like Eric has talked about, because that way, if you control it and get out ahead of it, it plants that seed in their mind, and then they might not even think of it as a negative because you just told them you're a risk taker, you're innovative, you're forward thinking. And if you tell them ahead of time what to think, they may not even see it as a negative.
That's helpful. Thank you. I think my total lack of success was very disheartening. It was just, I just, instead of being like, I just need to reclaim the narrative and be more effective in my communication, I just went, wow, that was a lot of time and invested. I don't know, it just really knocked me out.
I sympathize 100%. I was sent to training by my manager for something where I learned how to do a very specific type of animation, digital animation. And when I finished it, I demoed it and I showed them, like, this is exactly how we're going to do it. And my manager took all that information and gave it to a different employee and said, she really wants a chance to learn it, so I'm going to let her do it. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? Why did I just do that? And I don't even really talk about it because I feel like, I understand it mentally, but I wasn't the one that did any of that work, and I wouldn't, I think, be able to replicate it. So I don't even bother to mention it on my resume.
Yeah, but I appreciate you pointing out, even if it didn't come to fruition, it does show my thinking, which was forward-looking, which was adapting with change and like trying to get on the crest of the next wave. That's exactly what I was thinking. So maybe that, even if it didn't come to fruition, that shows, how I think.
Yeah, I would think so. It would be someone I would want on my team.
Well, I'm out there again, revamping.
Yeah, that would be a great question that would come up. It's like why you did what you did, because it gives people. I ask those kinds of questions, right? It's not just looking at sort of the narrative, but like how are those choices made? Because and the answer to that helps give me a sense of a person's values, right? And then I'm kind of looking at this person's values and how those align with the rest of the team, right? So yeah, I mean, just crafting your narrative and just trying to get it smoother. And I like the point that Jason made in terms of getting out ahead of it, because you can frame the narrative in a way that, if you left it to the devices of the recruiter or the interviewer to come up with the question, it might come from an angle of scrutiny of, but if you get out ahead of it and you control the narrative and framing, it shows that you were proactive. It shows that you were thinking ahead. It shows that maybe you made a mistake, which is fine, right? But you took action, right? And you learn from the mistake. And those are all the things that are important, right? So yeah. So I got to jump here, you guys, but Jason, anything else I can help?
I think I just have a really quick question. I hear everyone calling themselves a fractional this and a fractional that.
Yeah.
And a lot of it seems like wrapped up in like VP or like the C-level things. Is there any reason I can't call myself a fractional, what I do as a profession, a fractional digital storyteller, a fractional creative director?
Yeah, so I had this question too of folks maybe a few months ago, and fractional is sort of the new buzzword for like consultant. My understanding of the difference is that fractional folks tend to have more execution oriented scope than consultants, where consultants come in and they talk about this or that, and the internal team is on the hook to implement it, if they are on the hook at all. To implement and execute, whereas the fractional folks, they're in charge of strategy, but they also they're also implementing. So they're on the hook for it. That's my understanding.
That's really great.
I think they also might work for equity.
Yeah, there may be some of that too. So they have a bit more of a stake in the game. I've seen different combinations of folks that are taking fractional roles on. Some taking them on a part-time basis, where they might have one or two or three or multiple concurrent roles. And then they see that as sort of a pathway to just trying before they buy or trying before they commit.
Right. Yeah. Which seems like a lot of what's happening out there right now is folks are very hesitant to commit. They want to maybe test.
Yeah.
Although in my state, you can fire someone whenever you want because we're a right to work state.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in Utah and it's all at will, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of my understanding.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a great week. I hope to see you guys.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.